My brother demanded I invest in his gaming studio dream, then exploded when I asked where the money went, but what I found when I visited his office proved I was right to walk away. Should I feel guilty? My brother and I, he's 32 and I'm 30, had always had what I thought was a close relationship. What brought us together wasn't anything particularly deep. It was video games. But for kids, that was profound enough for our age. We loved gaming so much that we often talked about starting a game development studio together someday. We both learned to program, but eventually followed different paths toward that goal. He studied video game design in college, while I opted for a more traditional route, focusing on software engineering and eventually becoming a full-stack web developer. It was a good move for my career. I'm paid very well for it since everyone wants their own website and online store. I currently run a startup with a successful service that's generating good money. My brother, on the other hand, worked in the video game industry, collaborated with various companies, and created some games of his own. One of them achieved decent sales, but the others weren't very successful. If I had to pinpoint where he failed, I'd say he wasn't very serious about marketing. They were simply projects he was passionate about and put up for sale, but he never took it a step further, which I thought was a real shame because he's a talented developer and a good game designer. About 6 months ago, he approached me with the idea of expanding his project. He wanted to move from being a one-person operation to a full studio. At first, I thought it was a great idea. He asked me to join as a partner. I had to tell him no. I didn't have the experience he had in game development, and I didn't have the time either. I had my own obligations to take care of, a job and my startup, which consumed most of my free time. He seemed a bit disappointed, but there was nothing I could do about it. Finally, he proposed that I help finance his studio. He had saved money from his job, but it wasn't enough to fund a larger project. I told him I wasn't comfortable with that. Business and family never mix well. He insisted we had nothing to worry about. He was a good game designer and had proven experience in the industry. At some point, my family got involved too. My sister insisted it was a good idea. She argued that my claim about business and family not mixing was simply wrong. After all, she said, look at family businesses and mom-and-pop shops. Many of them do very well. She was convinced it could be done if everyone involved was smart about it. That actually made sense to me. She was right, but the problem was that not everyone involved ends up being smart about it. I gave my brother the news that I would do business with him, but that I would be an investor and expected our business relationship to reflect that. I would provide the initial capital and continue to invest money as certain project milestones were met, all very professional. He agreed and assured me he would only create hits. But I had more conditions. It was his reaction to these conditions that should have warned me things weren't going to work out. I told him this was a business and we would handle it as such. Before I gave him a single cent, I would need him to draft a detailed business plan outlining the types of games he wanted to create, how he planned to spend the money, and most importantly, how he was going to make it back. There was no room for improvisation here. He didn't like this. He said he wanted to create games that people would love, and that he couldn't do that if there was pressure. He made it clear he wasn't expecting a big financial success with this, or even to recoup the investment at first. I was mainly trying to prevent this from becoming a money pit, and I explained this to him. If the first game did well, I would feel comfortable investing more money in the second project. Eventually, we could start generating healthy profits in a few years. I reminded him that I had experience starting a company. It needed proper planning and structure. It couldn't be managed with just good intentions. In the end, he accepted, although I could tell he wasn't very happy about it. But to his credit, he did what I asked. He delivered a detailed document describing how he would make the game. He had specific plans for artists, music, and sound design, and a marketing campaign. He even wrote a game design document for the first project he wanted to create. Things seemed to be going well. I had high expectations for the project, and I think the game could have done well if he had actually followed through. It all started promisingly, but it didn't end the same way. He began building the prototype himself and hired freelancers to complete tasks he couldn't handle. He's a talented developer, but he lacks skills in art and music production. I didn't want to be too involved with the studio. He was my brother after all. I trusted him and didn't want to micromanage. Plus, I had plenty of my own things to focus on. Occasionally, we would catch up when we saw each other and discuss how things were going. He also sent regular status reports showing that everything was on track, albeit a bit slow. I had no real reason to worry. But then he started making bad decisions. He began hiring more people than he really needed, and subscribing to expensive software when there were more economical or free alternatives. The prototype started falling behind schedule, and costs kept accumulating. When I expressed my concerns, he just assured me that everything was under control and that I should relax and leave the studio operations in his hands. It was difficult, but I didn't have much choice. Everything came crashing down a few days ago. About 3 months after the studio started, he came to my house one weekend and said we needed to have an important discussion. We both sat in my living room, and I noticed he seemed uncomfortable. He kept shifting in his seat, and a couple of times it seemed like he wanted to say something but stopped. After a few minutes of small talk, I brought the conversation back to the topic. "You said you wanted to tell me something," I prompted. He took a deep breath and sighed before responding. He told me the studio was running out of funds and needed another round of financing if we didn't want it to close. I knew things weren't going as well as expected, but all projects have deviations. I knew he had been spending a lot of money, but this was much more alarming. According to the business plan, the initial funding was supposed to sustain the studio for 6 months of development until they had a viable version of the game. Somehow he had burned through the entire budget in half the projected time. I asked what had happened to the money. He simply said that's how things were and mentioned unexpected costs. I told him that wasn't a good answer and asked what unexpected costs had come up. I needed more details. He fumbled with his words a bit but couldn't name a single one. I told him this was concerning and asked for an expense report. He became visibly upset and said I was acting like I was his boss. I pointed out that I was an investor and needed to make sure the money I was providing was being spent responsibly. Now he was openly irritated, asking if I was accusing him of something. I guessed he thought I was accusing him of stealing the funds, which hadn't even crossed my mind. I told him I just thought maybe he had gone overboard with unnecessary expenses. I said the expense report could wait. I just needed him to tell me what he had been spending the money on. If it was justifiable, I would have no problem providing additional funds. I added that he would have to go through the same process with any other investor. That's when I got the first hint of the sentiment that had been building up. He muttered that I never let him forget that I had already done all this successfully before. I wanted to ignore it at first, but I couldn't. I told him I wasn't trying to rub my success in his face. I was trying to help him secure his own. His tone changed, and he blurted out that I wasn't helping. He said I was just being controlling and getting in the way of him making his dream game. I felt my frustration growing, but I tried to keep calm. I told him I had no problem with him making his dream game, but this was a business. Investors expect transparency. He couldn't just burn through money without accountability and expect funding to magically appear. I wasn't going to give him a pass just because we were family. If he couldn't handle this with me now, how would he handle it with external investors in the future? He didn't care about that and said my problem was that I was too focused on business. According to him, I was supposed to trust him because we were family. I told him that's exactly why I had hesitated to get involved in the first place. He just scoffed and said he shouldn't have to write reports and begged me just to help keep his business afloat. Then he said it was my family duty to invest and help him make his dream come true. This is where he lost me. Family duty? I was taking a significant financial risk with this, against my better judgment. I had gotten involved because I believed in him and wanted to support his dream. I wasn't expecting huge returns, but that didn't mean I was willing to throw money out the window. I mean, it was money that had cost me effort to earn too. I remained silent for a while, thinking about the situation. It seemed to me that we were no longer on the same page, and I didn't want to lose my relationship with my brother over this. If we were having problems regarding how the business was being managed, maybe the best thing would be to dissolve our business partnership. He was surprised, and my suggestion seemed to make him reconsider a bit. He admitted he could work on sticking more to the plan if that would make me happy. He also promised to send me an expense report. I felt a little relieved hearing this, but doubts had already formed in my mind. I provided a bit more funding to keep the studio running for another month. I told him this was just to keep the studio afloat until I received the expense report, but the truth is I was just buying time to think. I wasn't sure if I wanted to continue working with him after this. On one hand, he's my brother, and we've been through a lot together. On the other hand, he's proving to be not very good at running a business, and I feel like there's something he's hiding from me. I was waiting for the report and the next month's progress to decide, but I was open to all opinions. Update 1. The things I have to tell you are the culmination of situations that have happened during this time, and I was forced to make a decision that I think was ultimately the best for everyone involved. First, I eventually received the expense report, and to say I was disappointed would be an understatement. The report was clearly incomplete because the total didn't match the initial funding. Either the accounting hadn't been done properly, or he was diverting money for personal use. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and assumed it was the former. However, there was a bigger problem, one that ended any possibility of me continuing to finance him. I didn't call him to discuss this. Instead, I looked up the address mentioned in the expense report and drove there myself. It was a large building, not one of the most expensive, but still pricier than he should have been paying at this stage. You're just starting. You should be using something much cheaper to focus all the funds on what's important. When I arrived at his office, I felt the annoyance growing inside me. When I got there, he wasn't completely surprised to see me. After all, he had included the address in the report, but he did seem surprised that I had come to see him. The office itself wasn't very large, with enough space for perhaps 20 people depending on how they were distributed. Still, it was a lot of space for him. He was alone there. I didn't know where to start. I tried to stay calm so we could discuss things maturely, but that didn't last long. I asked him why he had rented an office, and he seemed confused. Because the studio needs an office, he said slowly, as if it were so obvious anyone should think it. I pointed out that he was far from profitable and had no employees. He was the only one there. He said I didn't understand, arguing that people expect any tech-related business to have a flashy studio. According to him, that would help attract talent. I was feeling increasingly annoyed. All the people working on his game were freelancers. They didn't care what his studio looked like or even visit it. That led me to my next point. From what I could gather from the expense and progress reports, he was paying all these freelancers monthly, even when some of them had no tasks to do. He was throwing money down the drain. I told him things couldn't continue like this. He would have to make some changes and restructure to keep expenses under control. I explained that he needed to leave the office space, sell everything he had bought for it, and let go of the additional freelancers who were burning money without really working. That was the breaking point. He exploded, saying I was jealous of his creativity and vision. He brought up the fact that I didn't have an office and said it bothered me that he had one before me. I tried to explain that my business was completely remote because that helped save money, and most of the people working with me lived in other countries. But he interrupted me. He continued ranting, accusing me of trying to control him with my money. He said many other things too, some of which I don't like to remember. The worst was when he accused me of valuing money above family. I'm not going to lie. It broke my heart to hear all that. I was surprised to discover that's what he thought of me. I was also disappointed not to be able to continue helping him fulfill his dream. I really believed in him and had given him more chances than he deserved, but it was enough. I told him right then that I was withdrawing my investment from the studio. I regretted it had come to this, but I wasn't going to continue putting my time and money into something where I wasn't respected either as an investor or as a person. He was furious, accusing me of ruining his dreams just because I needed to put conditions on my support. He even said I was betraying the family by withdrawing from his business. I told him there was nothing to change my decision. I had done my best for him, but I had been ignored and insulted. I left the office without saying another word. There was a real storm in my family after that. I had people from all sides trying to reason with me. My parents tried to intervene, begging me to give him one more chance. They said he was simply passionate about his work and needed time to figure things out. I told them I had already given him a second chance, and he had simply doubled down on his bad decisions. My sister was a bit more understanding, but she still tried to convince me to reconsider. Eventually, they stopped insisting when they got tired of hearing the same response. I couldn't keep allowing him to make bad decisions. My brother's studio collapsed almost immediately. He didn't follow my advice to get rid of the office space or sell what he had bought for it. Instead, he tried to hold on to it until the end. One of his designers, someone I had worked with before and who I had recommended to my brother, told me how things went down. When my brother realized the funding had run out, he tried to get as much work as possible out of his freelancers. He assigned them ridiculous workloads and unrealistic deadlines. Most started complaining, and some even dropped out of the project. Most left when he started pressuring them and being rude when they didn't meet the impossible deadlines he had set. Eventually, work on the project stopped completely, and my brother cut off all communication with the few people left on the team. It was safe to assume he had given up on the studio entirely because my sister told me he was looking for work again in the video game industry. I didn't hear any of this directly from my brother. He came a few times to try to change my mind, but I never gave in. The last time, he just had his usual tantrum and said that just because I had moved away from video games and become an old man, I couldn't see the forest for the trees. I haven't heard from him since. My parents still openly blame me for the failure of his studio, despite the fact that I was the one who gave him a chance to take off in the first place. They haven't cut ties with me like my brother has, but things are so uncomfortable with them that I no longer make much effort to stay in touch. I've started to accept the idea that my relationship with my brother may never fully recover. I'm disappointed that things have come to this, but I'm not going to let myself be taken advantage of. Supporting his business was a decision I made, not an obligation. In the end, I should have trusted my initial judgment about not mixing family and business. I had a feeling it would end badly, and it did. But I don't regret standing firm when I did and ending things before they got worse. Update 2. My brother has started talking to me again, though only for a moment and because he needed something more from me, and he stopped talking to me because I couldn't give it to him, and I went back to being the evil brother. We live in an area where there are many types of companies looking for talent, but also where everyone knows everyone. They know where they've worked, what companies they founded, and how they've done with them. My brother also wasn't the best person to deal with as an employee. As I said, he wasn't a bad developer, but at the same time, he was more concerned with his projects than those of his employer. He's gone to interviews here and there, but in these months he hasn't found a job. I know he's received offers, but according to him, they were to work on unattractive projects. Come on, you need money to survive, and you're worried about whether the projects are attractive or not. You should first worry about getting a salary to pay your expenses. I still keep a job because I know how this world is. Your business might be going very well, but there are many things that can go wrong, and the dream ends in the blink of an eye. I know all these details about my brother through my sister, who is the only one who has begun to see him for what he really is. My parents still defend him. Some have said he might be the golden child, but believe me, my parents have never made differences between us. They've always given us the same. I simply think they can't bear to see one of their children suffering and try to do whatever they can to help him. The problem is, they do it at the expense of my money, and that's what has led us to clash and have a bad relationship. Well, to have no relationship at all. That's why my brother has turned to me again to get a job. I don't know if I should call it a job because what he wanted was to take the creative reins of my company. The problem is that it's not a company that needs large doses of creativity at the moment. It's quite boring, to be honest. It's still very small, and while I believe every company can benefit from creativity, we're not at that stage yet, much less hiring someone exclusively for that task. I told him I didn't know how he could fit into my company since we don't develop video games, something he's made very clear to me many times when we discuss the economic problems of his own. But my brother justified his idea by saying he would be a great addition to my company and could help it. Though, of course, there was a price. I would give him 30% of it. To help you understand better, he wants me to give him 30% of a company he didn't help create, and for a job that isn't absolutely necessary right now. Talk about wasting money. And if that doesn't seem like enough of a problem, he also wanted to work in my company's office. The office is a room in my house, which happens to be where I have dinner at night. So I didn't want to have my brother working from my kitchen. But when he explained what kind of office he was referring to, he was talking about expanding. If that's his quota of creativity, I think I'll pass. I asked him if at least with his salary he would pay back the investment I made in his failed business, and he said no, because according to him, I had already recovered my money. I should clarify that when he finally closed the company, some furniture and other valuable items were sold, which helped recover part of the money, but not all of it. Unfortunately, it was an investment, and not all investments work out. Therefore, recovering a part is much better than I could have expected. However, my brother is angry because he came out of that business with nothing. I told him the truth, that I didn't have a job for him. After that, he moved back in with my parents because living in this city isn't cheap. He wanted me to at least give him a place to stay, but something inside me told me that if I did, it would be the same or worse than doing business with a family member. Thanks to him moving in with my parents and my sister living there, I know some details like the ones I mentioned. I've also rekindled my relationship with my sister because she can't stand him, and now she's on my side. I hope this is the conclusion of my story with my brother. If I've gained anything good from this, it's that at least I've learned that investing in family members isn't a good idea. No matter how hard you try to make it a professional relationship, it never will be. I'd love to be wrong, and for this to just be my experience. That's why I hope someone will tell me about theirs and that it's been successful. So far, I've only received stories similar to mine.